Okay, so it's time to have some fun with SIP here. Now, one of the features, as you recall, UCDP, has to do specifically not only with network monitoring, but also with SIP monitoring. And since that's really our focus for this session, we're going to take a look at how this really works and what we have at our disposal. And we'll start off by going back to Investigate and Sessions at the top. Okay, and before I forget, I'm just going to go ahead and erase that from SSID. Now, something that we have that we talked a little bit about and we said we were coming back to, that's happening now, and that's termination reason. Now, we've been looking at a lot of things or examples where there was some poor quality performance on the network side of the call, but we haven't looked at things like unusual behavior for calls. So those might be something where really SIP and SIP monitoring as a whole comes to the rescue here. Now, what we mean by that, though, is that consider this. Rather than a call being affected by poor quality, what happens if the call is affected by bad behavior? Now, bad behavior in this case means something like, let's say the signaling between the SBC and the SIP provider there was something amiss there. But either way, whatever happened when the call was trying to be set up, maybe after about 30 seconds, it just dropped for no reason. That's actually a fairly common one, especially when dialing conferencing, or maybe a call between two disparate systems that are both being monitored, say by UCD, suddenly the call just drops out, or it goes dead, or it sounds like it connects, and it sounds like maybe the other person on the other line picked up, but there was just nothing. Maybe that was one-way audio, maybe it just didn't connect, maybe it hung. Those kinds of things are common to look for more bad behavior from SIP as opposed to bad networking behavior. Now, that's not always going to be the case, but that's usually a really good place to start. And that's where UCD's features to monitor SIP come into play. So using our example here again, we're now coming back to termination reason. And here we have just a couple options here. We have non-network failure, active, and failure, and then of course our default is all. Now in that case, non-network failure, that might be something like signaling between either two systems, one SBC and one our internal environment, or it could be also be the provider. Active typically means that the call is still in progress. And then failure is where there's an instance where maybe some kind of SIP code, as we'll see here, caused the call to end prematurely or maybe unexpectedly. For right now, we're just going to go ahead and keep it at all. And I'm going to say submit, leaving all of the defaults in place here. So we'll say submit, and then we'll wait for our query to return here. Okay, and our query just came back. Now, just for ease of viewing, I'm going to go ahead and enlarge this view and say take up full screen here. All right. So now something I'm going to do, we have termination reason in progress, and they're all at zeros. Right now that means that there hasn't been any performance metrics collected yet, but the call is still active. Now I'm just going to change this and have it sort by number, sort ascending. That's the up arrow here. And now here, termination reason, this is where we can see that SIP is coming into play. And the reason for that is because, much like HTTP, SIP gives response codes, and actually those response codes are a lot like HTTP codes, but we have specific ones that mean different things. So 480, temporarily unavailable, that can be a bad one, definitely. Same with a 486. If we're getting a number that's maybe meant to be an active group, something like somebody calling the IT help desk, for example, but they're getting a 486, meaning that they're getting a busy signal when they try to call in. That could be a pretty big or significant error depending on who's calling who. And then we have, of course, our other calls. We have ones that show a normal termination. That's typically where there's a bye message, and that's kind of the end of the call. That usually signifies somebody hanging up normally. There's also other ones down here, things that like we'll see that are, well, actually that actually might be it. So we have in progress and normal, but some of these ones up at the top here, those are concerning depending on what we have here, depending on what we see. So in this case, what we can do is sometimes drilling down helps because you can see the network path, but since we're not troubleshooting quality performance, that may not help as much. Let's go ahead and do it anyway just to see what it looks like. Okay, and this is actually a really good example of it. So here we can see it was a voice session. It was a 480 temporarily unavailable, so tell us something we don't know. And we do, of course, see that we have this from ID and to ID. There's our IP addresses. Really, that was already given to us. Beyond that, though, our network hop ends there. And that's because this call really didn't connect. I mean, the duration for it specifically was 0. So something like looking at the network hop by hop for performance is not going to help us as much as, say, examining the SIP information specifically. Now, the cool thing about that, though, is that we have the option of doing that by having this record selected specifically and then clicking on the option to download the capture for it. So this option here, it looks like a notepad with some lines and a down arrow, gives us the ability to download the PCAP of the SIP information for this call. So I'm going to go ahead and click on it. And then briefly, just up at the top left, we get a message saying that a download is occurring. Now, what's actually occurring now, though, is that right now UCD is prepping that SIP information for us, and then once it's ready, it'll download it to our machine, to our workstation that we're accessing UCD from, and we can open it in something like Wireshark. So let's go ahead and download that and see what that looks like. Okay, and in fact, as I speak, here is the message saying that there's a PCAP ready for us, and we can choose to open it with Wireshark or save it to this machine. Since we just want to take a look at the SIP capture, and this is a demo environment, I'm just going to go ahead and say, yeah, go ahead and open up with Wireshark. Okay, so Wireshark is opening, and thank goodness it didn't give me an update message. But here we can see that we already have the SIP capture, and I can look at some of these things specific to this call. Now, this might not be as detailed in just looking at the capture alone as looking at something like a syslog, because if there's an issue with an SBC that's beyond what the SIP information provides, then this will only be helpful to a point. Now, I'm talking, of course, about specific hardware failures. But if we're looking at examining the flow of this call and how it at least tried to set up, then we can use different things to look at this. For example, I have my expert alerts info set to on for Wireshark. So as I'm expanding these headers here, the ones that are highlighted in blue means it's picking up something that's really not very usual. So for example, we have a timestamp here. That's fine. I don't expect that to tell us a whole lot. But already, because I see MS Diagnostics, I do at least see that we're getting some information that is specific to a Skype for Business related environment. Now, in terms of SIP headers, MS Diagnostics will tell us information about the type of error that was occurring when it had this 480. So some systems have their own special codes that go along into their SIP headers that tell you more information, and that's really why I wanted to download this PCAP. Because now I can see specifically for this PCAP, and actually for this 480 temporarily unavailable specifically, we're seeing that we're getting this error right now because the routing rules did not result in a final response, callee, blah, 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 something with unified messaging. Meaning that this person tried to call into their unified messaging. Now, for Skype for Business, or rather non-Skype for Business people, that's kind of a voicemail thing or an auto attendant thing here. But in terms of what this person tried to do, they tried to call into the voicemail system or to some feature that made use of unified messaging, but they weren't actually enabled for it. So looking at the PCAP for something like this allows us to get more context on what actually occurred with these SIP error messages. Now that's huge for us because it negates the need to have something like, so I'll use audio codes as an example. They have a syslog service that returns a SIP information. Now there is other information that is returned as well, but in terms of capturing the SIP from that, especially if we're bracketing something like an audio codes SBC or even a via codes SBCs or other SBCs that are within our environment, if we're bracketing, then we're not only going to pick up SIP from just between the internal environment and our SBC, but also between our SBC and the provider. So that's really where the strength of this comes into play. So again, just wrapping up this example, I'm going to go ahead and X out of that. I'm pretending that I saved that, but that's just how you would use something like UCD to get more information, specifically the PCAP, which is pretty cool, about our calls that are going on within our environment.